was murdered in front of her children.
That poor woman was butchered. It was horrendous.
Her millionaire ex-husband is a suspect from the start.
He just had that arrogance about him. He can't touch me. He's never going to get me.
The investigation grinds on for 2 years as the suspect spends his days on the golf course.
He would always say, "Oh, she'll never leave me because if she does, I'll kill her."
Investigate me as much as you want. I had nothing to do with this.
This man is a confessed killer. His name is Joey Del Toro. He is 26 years old, and he will be behind bars until he dies. In the fall of 1997, Del Toro slipped into the Florida home of Sheila Bellush, a 35-year-old mother of 6. He shot her in the face, slashed her throat twice, and left her to die.
I hadn't realized what I had done. I knew I had done something wrong, but I hadn't realized what I had done. I just felt numb, like I couldn't feel anything. I asked God, I go, "God, why did you not let me die before I had done something like this?" There's not a day that goes by that I don't regret everything that I did.
On one level, Joey Del Toro is the central character in the story of Sheila Bellush's murder, the man responsible for so savagely ending her life. Yet at the same time, he is just a bit player, one link in a complicated plot that took 3 long years to untangle and started with the question, why would a 21-year-old from Texas travel over 1,000 miles to murder a Florida housewife?
We're gonna get pictures.
In the fall of 1997, Sheila Bellush and her family were starting a new life. To all appearances, they were a typical, if chaotic, household. Sheila and her husband Jamie had their hands full with 23-month-old quadruplets, along with Sheila's 2 daughters by her previous husband. But their circumstances were anything but ordinary. For nearly a decade, Sheila had been fighting a fierce custody battle with her ex-husband, San Antonio millionaire Alan Blackthorne. In September, the Bellushes had fled to this quiet subdivision in Sarasota, Florida, in the hopes of severing all ties to him.
When we moved to Florida, I knew that we were definitely being very cautious. We tried to keep it between family and friends about where we were going.
By November, Sheila and her family had settled into a comfortable routine. On the afternoon of Friday the 7th, 13-year-old Stevie Bellush was rushing home to tell her mother about a blossoming junior high crush.
I had like this extra jump in my step, and I was just going to tell her about everything that happened at school that day.
When Stevie walked in the house, she thought it was unusual that the quadruplets were sitting in the hallway crying.
So I called my mom's name. She didn't answer.
Stevie headed toward the laundry room, but stopped when she reached the kitchen.
I saw like the trail of blood and the clothes everywhere and just the complete disarray of the kitchen.
Her mother lay motionless on the floor, surrounded by a drying pool of blood.
I bent down and actually like looked at her, and I touched her face. I kind of wanted to pick her up and hold her. I was like, no, I can't hold her. I can't touch anything.
The distraught teenager called 911.
Your mom what? My mom is dead. Okay, what made you think that? There's blood all over the place and she has a cut on her neck. Then you can answer your phone.
The 911 operator dispatched police and tried to calm Stevie.
Okay, Stevie, we have help on the way, okay?
At the scene, officers found no signs of a burglary, but the pattern of smeared blood on the floor and walls indicated that there had been a struggle.
She's
Sarasota County Detective Chris Iorio was one of the policemen who responded to the dispatch.
We had blood everywhere. It was pretty obvious to us that there was a conflict that started somewhere in the laundry room area and progressed out into the kitchen.
The four toddlers had apparently witnessed their mother's murder and been home alone with her body for more than 6 hours.
When the deputies first got there, they thought maybe the kids were injured because they did have blood on them. It was later determined that they were just walking around in their mother's blood.
Jamie Bellush telephoned Sheila's sister in Salem, Oregon, with the news.
He told me that my sister had been killed, and I told him that he was a liar. And then he just sat there and didn't say anything. And then it sunk in.
At the crime scene, Stevie Bellush told detectives who she believed killed her mother.
She said, "My dad did this, Alan Blackthorne." We had no reason to believe he was in the area, but we kept that in the back of our mind.
Police continued to gather evidence. The killer had left behind a bloody fingerprint on the clothes dryer and a bullet shell casing from a .45 caliber automatic pistol. But the most valuable information was given to detectives by a vigilant neighbor. Earlier that day, the neighbor had seen a suspicious man leaving a sports car parked around the corner from the Bellush home.
He had a license plate of a car that he'd seen in the area. He did write it down, which was a huge break for us.
Within 2 days, detectives had traced the license plate and fingerprints to a 21-year-old from southern Texas named Joey Del Toro. Sarasota authorities immediately contacted the Texas Rangers to assist with the investigation. Sergeant Gerardo de los Santos was assigned to the case.
Initially, when they said that the suspect was from the Texas area, the first thought that came to mind, maybe it could be their ex-husband. But there was no firm connection between Del Toro and Alan Blackthorne.
Nor was there anything in Del Toro's background to indicate that he'd commit such a crime. His only significant prior conviction was for shoplifting.
He was not a big-time criminal. A lot of girls, excellent football player, good-looking kid. That's basically what was coming from Joey Del Toro.
It didn't take long for detectives to track down Del Toro's car, which was parked at his girlfriend's house in Austin. Inside the car, they discovered a wealth of evidence. The address and directions to the Bellush home, the camouflage clothing Del Toro had been seen wearing, and a .45 caliber handgun.
We found his clothing with blood on it. We found some of Sheila's blood on the upholstery in the car. Just about everything you'd want to find, we found, which was nice.
It was unreal. He was just leaving evidence everywhere.
Yet the suspect himself was nowhere to be found. Detectives interviewed dozens of Del Toro's friends and family members, including his cousin, a 27-year-old golf caddy named Sammy Gonzalez. Gonzalez admitted that he had driven Del Toro to a San Antonio bus terminal, said that his cousin was headed for the Mexican border town of Laredo. But that was hardly the end of his story.
Sam was interviewed 3 or 4 times. Every time he interviewed, he gave a little bit more, until he eventually told the whole story.
In a taped confession, Gonzalez revealed that he had helped arrange the murder of Sheila Bellush, and he confirmed the detective's suspicions that Joey Del Toro was the hitman.
Tell me what you know about this incident. It's supposed to be just a beating and nothing about the killing was supposed to be occurred. I hadn't saw the news and kind of said about it and discussed about it.
Who committed this murder?
Supposed to have that total. When he was supposed to go down there and beat her up.
By the time he was done, Gonzalez would shed light on the events leading up to Sheila Bellush's murder and send investigators down a trail that seemed to lead in one direction. In November 1997, San Antonio golf caddy Sammy Gonzalez told authorities that he had helped arrange the brutal slaying of 35-year-old Florida homemaker Sheila Bellush. In exchange for a reduced prison sentence, Gonzalez fingered his cousin Joey Del Toro as the hitman and recounted for police Del Toro's gruesome depiction of the crime.
He said that he had shot her, but eventually I guess she was still moving or something like that. And came up to the kitchen and...
Got a knife?
Yeah, I got a knife.
Gonzalez had already helped his cousin flee to Mexico, but he did give investigators the name of another man who he said had coordinated the attack. A small-time San Antonio gambler named Danny Rocha.
Rocha first contacted Sammy to actually go and beat up Sheila initially. Once Sammy found out it was a woman, he did not want to do it. But he came up with the idea, well, maybe my cousin Joey would do it.
Gonzalez then provided police with an even more important piece of information. He mentioned that Danny Rocha was golfing buddies with someone named Alan. Investigators were convinced that Alan had to be Alan Blackthorne, Sheila Bellush's ex-husband. His daughters confirmed that he and Danny Rocha were friends.
When I heard Rocha, I was like, wait, I know him. And I saw his picture, and I'm like, I've played with his kids before.
In fact, police discovered Rocha had been golfing with Blackthorne on the day Sheila Bellush was killed. On November 17th, Danny Rocha was arrested at his home and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. From the beginning, he denied any involvement and refused to cooperate with authorities. Meanwhile, investigators continued to pursue who they believed had masterminded the murder. The man Sheila Bellush's family had suspected from the start, Alan Blackthorne.
I knew it had to be Alan, so he was somehow behind it.
Right away, I was like, it was my dad, wasn't it? He didn't have to pull the trigger to cause the action.
In a later television interview, Blackthorne defiantly maintained his innocence.
Investigate me as much as you want. I had nothing to do with this.
But as detectives dug into Sheila and Alan's past, they came to see her murder as the final act in a spiraling saga of domestic vengeance. Sheila Walsh met Alan Blackthorne in Salem, Oregon, when she was 19. He was 27 and already going through his second divorce. Crime author Ann Rule spent a year and a half researching Sheila's life for a book she wrote on the case.
He was every girl's ideal boyfriend. He was good-looking, he was smooth and seemingly successful, charismatic. The only one who really didn't like him was her sister Carrie, who saw something behind the perfect mask in Alan.
He seemed like a really nice, likable guy, but then he had a very bad temper, and he was really quick to anger.
By their third date, the couple was engaged. They married in February 1983. It seemed like a happy union. Over the next 3 years, Sheila would give birth to 2 daughters, Stevie and Daryl. Alan started a business importing electronic muscle stimulators, and he always managed to find time for his favorite pastime, golf.
I never really ever saw Alan work. He was a golfer. I mean, he was always golfing and always talking about golfing.
By 1986, the Blackthornes had moved to San Antonio, Texas, and Alan and Sheila's relationship had started to crumble. More and more often, Sheila found herself on the receiving end of Alan's violent temper.
She learned really quick that if she fought back, then she usually got hurt, or she got the bad end of it.
He would grab her by the collar and lift her up against the wall.
For Alan, it was all about control. He felt like Sheila was his. He would always say, well, Sheila will never leave me because if she does, I'll kill her.
On 2 occasions, Blackthorne was charged with battery for assaulting Sheila. Both times, he paid a fine and received probation.
She was only in her early 20s, and she looked like she was in her 40s.
Finally, after 4 years, Sheila had had enough. She filed for divorce in October 1987, and her petition was granted a year later.
When she did finally leave him, she said to me, it was either stay in the marriage and have him kill me that way, or leave and have a fighting chance.
But the end of the marriage was only the beginning of the war. Over the next few years, Blackthorne would file multiple petitions, claiming his child support payments were too high, even as his business boomed, eventually making him a millionaire.
He carried thousands of dollars in his wallet at a time, and he just liked the power of showing people, look how much money I have.
In 1993, Blackthorne got married for a fourth time. He and his wife Maureen had 2 sons and moved into a lavish mansion in suburban San Antonio. Sheila, meanwhile, had met and married a 31-year-old pharmaceutical salesman named Sheila Bellush. In 1995, she became a local celebrity when, through in vitro fertilization, she gave birth to quadruplets. But while her life seemed to be looking up, the courtroom combat continued.
I think that Sheila thought that when she married Jamie, you know, finally she would have somebody that would kind of help her fight the battle, but it didn't get any better.
Then, in the summer of 1997, Sheila went on the offensive. She filed charges against Alan, claiming that years before, he had sexually abused their daughter Stevie, now 13 years old. But the case never went to court. Sheila dropped the charges when Alan unexpectedly agreed to give up all parental rights to Stevie and Daryl.
I think she felt more threatened after he relinquished his parental rights because she knew she had won the ultimate battle as far as he was concerned.
Having lost the custody fight, Alan now tried a different tactic. He convinced 12-year-old Daryl to press charges after an argument with her mother left her with a bruised leg.
I talked to my dad, and he's like, well, you know what, that's beating and that's child abuse, and he's like, you should call the police.
Sheila was arrested and had to be bailed out of jail. Daryl now says her father manipulated her into accusing her mother.
When you can look back on it and you see really what happened, you know, it was I got punished for something that I did wrong that I deserved.
In September 1997, the Bellush family abruptly moved to Sarasota, Florida, leaving no forwarding address. Blackthorne would later claim that their departure made no impact on him.
I went out of my way to make sure that I had little to no contact. I didn't want any contact. I had moved on with my life.
Police looking into Sheila's murder, however, had a very different view. They saw her sudden departure as the insult that pushed Alan Blackthorne over the edge.
He hated to lose. I think the final straw was when he gave her parental rights and Sheila walked away with the kids. She had won, and that really, really got to him.
And I think at that point he began a terrible plot to destroy Sheila.
When we finally got into the investigation, everything led back to Alan Blackthorne.
Blackthorne had maintained his innocence from day one. In a later interview with a Tampa TV station, he said he first learned of his ex-wife's murder from the evening news and was shocked to hear he was a suspect.
We turned on the news, and the announcer came on and said, Sarasota police say the ex-husband did it. The search is on for the ex-husband. At that point, I mean, not only are you just kind of dumbfounded, but Maureen said, you know what, we better get a lawyer.
Alan was obviously upset about it and obviously nervous about it, but knew that he had nothing to do with it and didn't feel that ultimately anything bad would happen to him as a result of it.
While Blackthorne kept up his 5-day-a-week golfing schedule, police intensified their efforts to link him to the murder.
The challenge was now to find evidence to connect it to, whether that be bank records, through phone toll records, interviewing other people, witnesses that might have been told about this plan.
Investigators quickly discovered that just after Sheila's family had moved to Sarasota, leaving no forwarding address, Blackthorne methodically began tracking her down. Phone records showed that he made repeated calls to the San Antonio bail bond company that had issued Sheila's bond after her child abuse arrest that summer.
He was trying to ascertain Sheila's address by pretending to be somebody else.
Blackthorne was not aware that the conversations were being recorded.
Yes, ma'am. Do you folks have a bond on a Sheila Bellush for $5,000?
Well, I can't release that information. I don't know who you are.
Okay, what I'm trying to figure out is that, well, I'm somebody that they owe money to and they skipped out of state on me.
Phone records indicated that Blackthorne had hired a private investigator in Florida to locate his ex-wife. They also showed that 2 weeks before Sheila Bellush's murder, he had gotten a call from their 12-year-old daughter, Daryl.
He's like, oh, well, where do you live? And I'm like, well, I can't tell you that. He's like, why not? I'm like, because my mom doesn't want me to tell you.
According to Daryl, her father said he wanted to come visit them over the holidays. That was enough to persuade her to reveal the family's whereabouts.
I told him where we lived. He's like, okay, well, I can't wait till Christmas to come see you, and then never heard from him again.
Even with the evidence they'd found against Blackthorne, prosecutors faced an uphill battle without the corroborating testimony of Danny Rocha. Rocha was a gambler by nature and by trade. With no steady job, he supported his family by taking illegal bets on sporting events.
Danny always made it seem as if he was involved in something suspicious, you know. He always had that kind of demeanor.
Rocha had met Alan Blackthorne in 1996 when the millionaire businessman was looking for a high-stakes golf game.
Alan made no bones about the fact that he was a golf gambler, and Rocha made no bones about the fact that he was a golf hustler. And he laughed, as a matter of fact, about how much money he used to take from Alan.
To authorities, Rocha was the key witness, the only person who could directly link Blackthorne to Sheila's murder.
I don't have a pen.
But Rocha wasn't playing ball. He wouldn't tell investigators anything unless prosecutors agreed to a severely reduced sentence.
He wanted what we call a sweetheart deal. He believed that because he was the direct connection to Alan, he could plea bargain for a very, very low number of years to serve.
But as time passed, Rocha grew increasingly bitter that he was in jail, and Alan Blackthorne was still free, as he made clear in this interview with a Tampa TV station.
Here, I'm trying to do the right thing, and I'm trying to make a deal, and you know, he's back here in San Antonio, you know, playing golf 5 days a week.
Prosecutors did have one powerful weapon against Rocha, his buddy Sammy Gonzalez's confession. They charged Rocha with conspiring to commit murder, even as his plea negotiations continued. On January 12, 1999, Rocha's trial began in Sarasota. 2 days later, he folded his hand. In a last-ditch attempt to avoid life behind bars, he told investigators he would talk.
There's a saying in Spanish that is las últimas patadas de un ahogado, which literally translates to the last kicks of a drowning victim.
In January 1999, 2 days into his trial for plotting to kill Sheila Bellush, San Antonio bookie Danny Rocha struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would testify that he had been hired by the victim's ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne. At the Sarasota County Jail on January 14th, Rocha sat down with authorities and gave his version of the murder conspiracy. It all started, he said, in July 1997, when Blackthorne took him on a golfing trip to Oregon. It was there, Rocha claimed, that the millionaire first approached him about hiring someone to beat up his ex-wife. According to Rocha, Blackthorne's aim soon escalated from injuring her to killing her.
Danny would tell us through his conversation with Alan that, you know, if they beat her up, she could die, Alan. And Alan's response, so be it.
Rocha said he solicited his friend, Sammy Gonzalez, to make the hit. But there was a problem.
Once Sammy found out that the target was going to be a woman, he backed down and said, I can't do this to a woman.
Joey Del Toro, Gonzalez's cousin, was instead enlisted to carry out the hit. Rocha said that 3 days before the murder, he met with Gonzalez and Del Toro at the Pan American Golf Club in San Antonio to seal the deal. Rocha told Del Toro he would get $4,000 if he mutilated Sheila Bellush and $10,000 more if he killed her. Del Toro accepted and drove to Florida on his own.
And there goes Joey. Does his deed and comes all the way back. And then the whole house starts falling in.
When Rocha was finished, detectives moved quickly to make sure his story checked out. They were able to corroborate much of it through evidence they had already uncovered. But then they hit a snag. Recounting the plot for prosecutors, Rocha embellished his story enough to fail a polygraph test. Exasperated, the state declared its deal with Rocha null and void and refused to negotiate on his sentence. His trial continued, and on January 15, 1999, the jury handed down its verdict.
The jury find as follows as to count one of the charges. The defendant is guilty of principal to murder in the first degree.
He was sentenced to life in a Florida state prison.
He could have had the same deal Sammy had if he would have cooperated early on, but like he said himself, he's a gambler. He rolled the dice and lost.
Alan Blackthorne, however, appeared to have won. Without the testimony of Danny Rocha, Florida prosecutors were forced to shelve their case against him due to a lack of evidence. Blackthorne, meanwhile, was mounting an all-out PR campaign to clear his name. In July 1999, he gave an interview to a Florida news program, insisting he had nothing to hide.
Everybody has said, oh, why is he staying so quiet? Why didn't he talk to the media? Why didn't he do this? I mean, if I come out and talk to the media, am I sly and slick? Or if I stay quiet, am I shy and hiding? Guilty and hiding?
Blackthorne contended that he would never have robbed Stevie and Daryl of Sheila.
She was my daughter's mother. I'd already given up my parental rights. Who did those girls have left?
In San Antonio, federal prosecutors were paying close attention to Blackthorne and his public statements.
It was offensive that this man who so apparently was involved and was responsible for the killing of this woman was so arrogant.
After exploring their options, prosecutors decided their best bet was a 1994 statute called the Violence Against Women Act. The law made it a federal crime to commit domestic abuse across state lines. This meant that the inconsistencies in Danny Rocha's story would become less important to a successful prosecution.
He had given various stories over the year and a half or so up till then. Under every version, Blackthorne was involved. Blackthorne was the cause of the act.
Rocha, now serving life, agreed to testify. He hoped to be considered for a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony linking Blackthorne to Sheila's murder.
Rocha technically gave the authorities a case. In other words, liar or not, he said, Alan Blackthorne hired me to do this.
On January 4th, 2000, more than 2 years after Sheila's death, Alan Blackthorne was charged with interstate domestic violence, as well as conspiracy to commit murder for hire. When law enforcement was finally ready to put the cuffs on him, they knew exactly where to go: the golf course.
He just had that arrogance about him, that you can't touch me, you're never going to get me. We did.
On June 12, 2000, 1 week after his 45th birthday, Alan Blackthorne's trial began at the United States Federal Courthouse in San Antonio, Texas. Blackthorne stood accused of arranging the murder of his ex-wife, 35-year-old Sheila Bellush. He had been charged with interstate conspiracy to commit murder for hire and interstate domestic violence. Both charges carried a maximum sentence of life in prison. Assistant U.S. Attorney John Murphy led the prosecution's case.
That poor woman was butchered, and 4 23-month-old babies wandered around their dead mother for probably 6 hours. It was horrendous.
In his opening statement, Murphy sought to give jury members something he believed they needed to hear: a motive.
He'd lost the final battle when he relinquished his parental rights to those children. He told Danny, that bitch thinks she can outsmart me, but I'm going to show her. Again, demonstrating not only his hatred for her, but his lack of capacity to accept any kind of loss. He could not lose.
The prosecution began by playing a tape of the 911 call made by the victim's teenage daughter, Stevie Bellush, when she discovered her mother's body.
Okay, stay on line. Are your brothers and sisters younger than you? 43.
Imagine yourself being in her shoes. You know, you come home, Your mother's on the floor, kitchen floor with blood all over.
Soon after, the state called to the stand its problematic star witness, Danny Rocha, who was serving a life sentence for his part in the murder conspiracy. For hours, Rocha told the jurors of the plot outlined during his golf trip with Blackthorne in July 1997. He detailed how Blackthorne initially solicited him to mutilate Bellush, not kill her.
He didn't want it just to be a beating. He wanted her to be tortured. He wanted her back broken. He wanted her tongue cut out.
Rocha then explained how the plot came to involve two others, Sammy Gonzalez and Joey Del Toro, and how the $4,000 beating grew into the $14,000 murder.
Alan said the best way to do it is if the body is never found. Tell them to bury her in the woods, dump her in the ocean, or feed her to the alligators. That only means one thing: kill her.
Rocha's testimony was powerful, but it was also riddled with inconsistencies.
Rocha had lied over and over again. How can anybody rely upon this witness to send this man to prison for the rest of his life?
A lot of jurors were going like, they better come with something else besides just this one guy.
The defense used their cross-examination to introduce the crux of their argument, that Alan Blackthorne knew nothing about the murder plot, and that it was Danny Rocha who had arranged the whole thing. Rocha, they claimed, was motivated by a desire to strengthen his lucrative friendship with Blackthorne, and by Blackthorne's stories that his ex-wife had abused their children.
Alan would complain that the children were being beaten and he felt terrible about it. And probably Rocha was thinking, if I can stop the beatings, Alan will love me. He was a schemer, and he had this idea that Alan Blackthorne was a very, very wealthy businessman, and that Alan could be his ticket to financial success.
Prosecutors responded by presenting evidence that after Sheila Bellush moved to Florida, Blackthorne had obsessively hunted her down. They introduced phone records that showed dozens of calls from Blackthorne to a Florida private eye. They also played the recorded telephone inquiries Blackthorne made to a bail bonds company during his search for Sheila.
We had Alan's voice in this long telephone conversation telling all these outrageous lies.
I'm just trying to figure out where out of state that they run. I don't know. Pretty disgusting, anyone that would hurt a child. This is true.
The defense countered that Blackthorne's lies to the bond agency were justified by his concern for his two daughters.
If any of us felt that our kids were being physically abused, we'd lie to find out where they were so we could help them. Doesn't make him a murderer.
But prosecutors pointed out that once Blackthorne learned where his ex-wife lived, he never spoke to his kids again, even after her murder.
He was calling everywhere in Florida, trying to find Sheila Bellush, and once he got that address, all the calls stopped.
When the defense presented its side, a confident Alan Blackthorne was eager to testify.
There was no way that Alan Blackthorne wasn't going to take the stand. He was innocent, and he wanted to tell the jury that he was innocent.
Blackthorne denied any involvement in his ex-wife's murder. His demeanor during cross-examination surprised prosecutor John Murphy.
A man who had a reputation for a terrible temper remained completely cool, calm, and collected.
He turned to the jury and he was so friendly and drawing them in as you know, we're here together and we all see this as a fake case.
On June 29th, 2000, the jury retreated for deliberations.
It wasn't a slam dunk at all, and I remember wondering, is the jury going to buy this guy?
After 33 hours, the jury returned with its verdict. There were two counts against Blackthorne: interstate conspiracy to commit murder for hire and interstate domestic violence. The jury's verdict was the same on both counts: guilty.
His defense didn't hold any water, and the prosecution's story did. This guy's guilty. And I had no problem saying that. Still don't.
I just kind of sat there and cried for a couple hours because I knew it was finally over and done with, and that everybody that needed to be was finally brought to justice.
The 45-year-old millionaire was given 2 concurrent life sentences.
The worst thing he could do to Alan Blackthorne is take away his golf game. And he not playing golf now.
On the same day as Blackthorne's verdict, any lingering doubts about his involvement in the crime seemed to be erased over 1,000 miles away.
You understand that the charge of murder in the first degree...
That afternoon in Sarasota, Florida, Joey Del Toro pleaded guilty to the murder of Sheila Bellush. It had taken more than a year to extradite him from Mexico. Now Sarasota detectives were finally able to hear Del Toro's version of the story. In a videotaped confession, the 24-year-old outlined the murder plot and confirmed Blackthorne's involvement once and for all.
Not that the job was for them, but he said it was for somebody else. And I go, okay, so I asked him, well, for who? He says, well, I'm not supposed to tell you, but it's for a guy named Alan Blackthorne. The words that I received were that it would be better if she was dead. I knew that he was the one behind the whole thing, because his name was mentioned by Sammy, his name was mentioned by Danny, and I just knew it.
Del Toro told authorities he was led to believe that Sheila was abusing her children.
They just made it seem as if she was the horrible person, and they made Alan Blackthorne seem like the innocent.
The day of the murder, Del Toro said, he snuck into Sheila's house and watched her to see if what he'd been told was true. But what he saw was, quote, a loving, caring mother.
I was about to leave when she noticed that the door was open. And I couldn't run, I couldn't do anything. And so, well...
Joey Del Toro was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In the wake of Sheila's murder, her second husband, Jamie Bellush, and their quadruplets returned to his home state of New Jersey. Her teenage daughters, Daryl and Stevie, moved to Salem, Oregon to live with their aunt, Carrie Blador.
How do kids ever get over losing both their mother and their father? Because truly they did lose their father.
I have nothing to do with him, and I kind of wish he'd just die, because I don't think he deserves to live anymore.
Sheila's oldest daughter, Stevie, plans someday to visit her father in prison.
I'm definitely not as bitter as I once was. It would be nice to be sitting on the opposite side of the glass. I think that would definitely be some humiliation for him. I'm constantly, even now, thinking about, why? I don't really understand.
After his sentencing, Alan Blackthorne was sent to the Beaumont Federal Penitentiary.
Yeah.